So, good afternoon and thank you for joining us. We're delighted to welcome back Yaakov Lapin for Beyond the Headlines. Yaakov is an Israel-based military affairs correspondent and analyst known for his clear, incisive insights into the region's most pressing security developments. His Beyond the Headlines will help us, I am sure, cut through the noise and better understand the realities of our situation and the wider Middle East. Welcome, Yaakov. It's nice to see you, and the Zoom screen is yours.
Thank you very much. It's always great to talk to this group, to address this group. And as we've said at the beginning, because I speak to you on a regular basis, I want this to be informal and interactive. So if you have anything on your mind regarding these topics, feel free to fire away, and I will be more than happy to address it and to integrate it into my comments. There's no problem. In fact, I even prefer that. So feel free 100%. And look, I think that when we're talking about beyond the headlines, what really characterizes the main arenas, the security arenas that the state of Israel is dealing with right now, is I would call it a gray zone reality. And by that I mean that if you look at the situation that Israel faces today, beginning of February 2026, and you compare it to where we were at the start of the war back in October 2023, there is no question that Israel's strategic situation has improved dramatically, very significantly, on every single front. Our military situation, our security situation, our geostrategic situation in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Iran has improved significantly, even dramatically, I would say. And yet still we are in a gray zone because we haven't reached a level of decisiveness that would enable anybody to say, well, we know now where this is going. And I think that that gray zone combined with real dramatic improvements is something that cuts across every arena that we look at pretty much, especially the main ones. And I'm calling those Iran, Gaza, Lebanon, and also Syria. So I'm going to try and touch on those four. But if you want to pull me into a different arena as well, then I'm happy to talk about that as well. And I think, Iran in many ways is the elephant in the room. Everybody has their minds on what's going to happen with Iran. And just to give you a very quick recap, I'm sure that you're all following this, but basically what we have is a situation in which the United States under President Trump is employing what I can best describe as gunboat diplomacy. In other words, what he has done is send the USS Lincoln carrier strike group and missile boats and ships, offensive capabilities, Air Force squadrons that are positioned throughout the Middle East, in Jordan, in other countries, some of which have already said that they will not allow the United States to use their bases to strike Iran. But he has positioned a formidable firepower capability in the Middle East. And he's done that in response to one of the worst crimes against humanity that we have seen in decades. We're talking about reports, not corroborated yet, but they look pretty reliable, of at least tens of thousands. Some reports have put it at over 30,000. Some reports have put it at more. Iranians, the vast majority of them unarmed, killed, massacred when trying to demand a better future for themselves and their children under the terrible rule of the Islamic Republic, which is willing to do anything to stay in power, including commit mass murder against its civilians. So you're all aware of the situation. You're aware of the fact that the U.S. is closing in on Iran militarily, and at the same time, and this is the gray zone area. This is exactly an example of the gray zone area. As this military closure is surrounding Iran's neck, we have, at the same time, everything here is a split screen. On the other side of the screen, we have negotiations. Negotiations are underway because President Trump still wants to see if he can reach a deal with the Iranians. He would much rather be able to walk away from this, saying that he got a deal that nobody else before him could get. And basically, what President Trump is demanding of the Iranians is an end to their uranium enrichment nuclear program, an end to their ballistic missile program, and an end to their support for terrorist proxies throughout the region. The Iranians are not going to, in reality, agree to that, but what they could do is to pretend to be willing to discuss those in order to give President Trump some sort of diplomatic achievement and take the pressure off of them. The Iranians are masters at deception, masters at negotiations, and President Trump is going to try and apply the art of the deal on the Iranians using this gunboat diplomacy. Now, where does Israel come into all of this? Well, Israel is playing a very interesting role because we have to remember, first of all, that the Islamic Republic of Iran is significantly weakened compared to what it was a year ago. And the reason that it was weakened was primarily because of the operation that Israel launched in June, Rising Lion, which basically took out most of Iran's missile launch capabilities. I'm talking about the launchers. Two-thirds of Iran's launchers were destroyed. Anywhere between 50% to a third of Iran's ballistic missile stockpile was destroyed. Many of them, by the way, they were hit with UAV, Israeli UAV strikes, not even only fighter jets. Israeli UAVs had full control of the skies of Iran, and they were taking out Iranian launch capabilities in a similar way that Israel was doing in Gaza and Lebanon, except this is an arena that's 2,000 kilometers away. So Iran was greatly weakened by that war. Its missile capabilities were hit. It has since rebuilt to an unknown degree. It's trying to rebuild its missile capabilities. It's having trouble with that. I can go into that if you're interested into why it's having trouble. But the missiles that Iran really wants the most of are called solid fuel missiles, and those require special mixers called planetary mixers, which are machines that are very hard to get hold of. And the reason that Iran wants solid fuel missiles is because it takes much less time to prepare solid fuel missile launchers. So Iran can fire those kinds of missiles and leave a much lower intelligence fingerprint before it does so. Whereas liquid fueled missiles take much longer to prepare and mix the chemicals, and it gives Israel a much bigger heads up, so to speak. So Iran really wants to rebuild its solid fuel missile capabilities first and foremost. It's also trying to rebuild the other type. And there have been interceptions of these planetary mixers, including reportedly from China. So we see that there are reports of Chinese assistance to the Islamic Republic in trying to rebuild its missile capabilities. The nuclear capabilities, those are much slower in being rebuilt. We've had reports of Earth being put over some nuclear sites, one at Isfahan, which is a very important site that's used to create basically reprocessing of uranium. And also we have the sites at Arak, that's a heavy water facility, and of course Natanz and Fordow. Those are the main nuclear sites of Iran. All of them were hit in June, and most of that damage, to my understanding, remains in place. And we've got the proxy program of Iran, which also collapsed during this war, during the June war. In fact, Iran fought this war on its own. So that's a collapse of its entire proxy strategy. Iran had hoped to encircle Israel with a ring of fire and lead to its collapse. In the end, it ended up facing the Israeli Air Force all on its own, and the Israeli Air Force took over Tehran's airspace. That's not how they envisaged the war. So they're definitely wounded. And now add to that the millions of Iranians who made it clear that they no longer want to live under this regime because the economy has collapsed. They've wasted their funds on these foreign adventures, on their jihadist visions, and they can't, get water through their taps or buy, basic food products, and hyperinflation, and their currency has, gone through the roof. I'm sure there are lots of economic analysts that can talk you through the reasons that the Iranian economy has collapsed, but it has collapsed, and that is the trigger. So now we have this situation where Israel, first of all, I think, from my understanding, and talking to defense officials, we're talking about beyond the headlines. My understanding is that Israel is saying to itself, if this comes into a conflict scenario, and it's not clear that it will, by the way, it's not clear that it will, but if the United States attacks Iran and Iran decides to fire missiles at Israel, again, I'm going to say it's not a given. This is not inevitable. There are reasons to also doubt that this will happen, but let's assume that it will. The Israeli defense establishment is confident in its ability to deal with that scenario. And the reason that it's confident is because, first of all, it has run up directly against Iran's offensive capabilities, against its defensive capabilities, and it has found that the gap between Iran's capabilities and Israel's capabilities was big, really big, to Israel's advantage. If we want to talk about defensively, during the June War, Israel's air defense capabilities intercepted 86% of all the Iranian ballistic tactical ballistic missile threat, and 99% of the Iranian UAV, the large drones, were intercepted. I'll just repeat that: 99% of all of the Iranian drones fired at Israel during the June War were successfully intercepted. So Israel is confident that it will know how to deal with future volleys of Iranian missiles and drones if they are launched. That doesn't mean that the defense is hermetic, that we can, feel, relaxed if the siren goes off. Of course not. There's no such thing as 100% protection. It's still a dangerous situation. But it's not a situation that we haven't been through before. And there are reasons to believe that the Iranians will struggle to surpass the firing capabilities that they displayed back in June. So if they make the mistake and drag Israel into a conflict, I think that they will regret that decision, because not only have they not rebuilt their air defenses fully since that war, but also Israel has been feverishly studying all lessons from that war and has improved its air defense capabilities. The engineers have been working around the clock, particularly the Arrow 2 and the Arrow 3 systems. The Arrow 2 functions in the upper atmosphere. The Arrow 3 works in space. These systems have been upgraded. Nobody is sort of sitting on their hands, and of course the Iranians have done the same. Nobody is trivializing their capabilities. They have very capable engineers and scientists and missile engineers. So they obviously are also in a race. But when you look at the defense industrial base of Israel and Iran, I don't think that there's a real comparison here. Israel is significantly ahead of Iran in terms of military technology. Really is. And we saw that at the defensive level. Now, offensively, first of all, let's remember that back in June, the U.S. was involved in a very significant manner, but it was a one-off strike, Operation Midnight Hammer. They made a very important contribution, and then they left the campaign. The vast majority of the campaign was Israeli. Here, we've got the threat of major American firepower, and if the Iranians would fire on Israel, they would drag Israel in. So then Iran would face two of the most capable militaries in the Middle East, and that's the United States under CENTCOM, Central Command, and the Israel Defense Forces. And again, operationally, just to remind everybody what happened back in June, after a couple of days, Israel had full control of Iranian airspace and was taking out military leaders, nuclear scientists in their bunkers and their apartment buildings, and there was nothing the Iranians could do. They had no control over their airspace. Not in their worst nightmares did the Iranians think that that would happen to them. So there's no reason to believe that that wouldn't be able to happen again. I see that there's a question here about what's known. David is asking about Iran's leadership, location. David, I'm sure that you've seen the same reports I have. There were reports that Ayatollah Khamenei went into hiding. He was seen at Friday prayers along with his son. This was an attempt to show some normalcy. But of course, they're taking great care. I don't think that Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, is going to bolt Iran. There are all kinds of reports and claims that he was about to leave for Russia. He's not Assad. This is a religious fundamentalist. If he has to die in Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei will die in Iran. He's not going to escape Iran ever. But I think that he's most of the time he's in hiding, and sometimes they sort of bring him out to try and show the base of supporters, that the leadership is still very much, functional on a day-to-day basis. The Iranian leadership is made up of this alliance between the Ayatollahs, the religious, clergy of the Shiite Muslim population, the religious, very, very fundamentalist and jihadist segment of that population, which clearly is a minority. We saw that over the past month. And the IRGC, which is the elite military body that's dedicated to defending the regime, just as its name says, the Revolutionary Guard Corps. And then there's a second army, which is the main army, the Iranian army. The Iranian army is the one that is much bigger, but actually is sort of usually skipped over when it comes to getting the best resources, the best missiles, the money, the involvement in the Iranian economy. That's all done by the IRGC. And so that's why I've been saying since this, instability began in Iran, if we want to look for signs of the regime falling in Iran, what we have to look for is somebody inside the regime, an entity like the Iranian army, like the Iranian army officers, either turning their guns on the regime or calling on their comrades in large numbers to do so, or to at least to stop the massacre and repression of the Iranian people. That's what would be needed as a real flag that the regime is about to come down. And the regime, in any case, if it topples, it's going to be because the Iranians toppled it. No amount of air power, no matter how massive is on its own is enough, but the hope is among some people that enough air power could be a domino that could lead to the regime falling. But honestly, there's a very rigorous debate here between defense officials and former defense officials about whether this would do the trick, because we don't have an example in history of just air power toppling a regime, and certainly not in a country as vast as Iran. Another question here. There were 6 simultaneous gas leak explosions in Iran yesterday. Gas leaks. Yeah, well, listen, I saw the same reports, including, by the way, one in the strategic port city, whose name currently escapes me, but it's a very important port city in southern Iran. An explosion there in a multi-story building. Um, Look, it wouldn't surprise me if there was a covert warning operation to the Iranians. Of course, we don't know that. The Iranians have said that these explosions are accidents and that people are tying dots together when these are just accidents that always happen in a country as big as Iran. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a warning sent through these kinds of acts of sabotage. By the way, that port is called Bandar Abbas. It just popped into my head. And just the location of that blast is a little bit suspicious. But this is all part of the gray zone. Okay, gray zone includes covert operations, warnings, things that have low fingerprints, things that are deniable. This is the stage that we're at with Iran. And so Israel now is absolutely ready. I would say its air defenses are at the very highest level. Its Air Force, that's in charge of the offensive part, if there's a need for that, is ready. Israel is ready. This decision is going to be made by President Trump. He's got a lot of pressure on him, by the way, also from Iran's Arab neighbors who are urging him not to do this. Why? Because they don't want to be hit with Iranian missiles. They don't want the instability. They don't want the conflict. They would much rather manage the Iranian problem, even though they're very fearful of the Iranian regime. They are simply allergic to conflict, and they don't have any confidence that this kind of attack would lead to regime change. And publicly, at least, they're making it known that they're in favor of mediation. What their stance is in private, we don't know. We saw a report from the United States saying that the Saudi defense minister during private talks said that if President Trump walks back and doesn't strike, it's going to harm the U.S. image in the eyes of the Iranian protesters. That's not something that the Saudis would ever say publicly, and they've kind of walked that back. So we have to assume that there are always big gaps between what the Arab states of this region say publicly in order to protect their interests and their image, and what they say privately. And that duality is something that cuts right across the statements of many of the moderate Arab countries in this region. So that's another thing to remember, especially if we're thinking about beyond the headlines. So I would just say that looking at this from a military perspective, again, I would just summarize by saying that Israel's defense establishment feels confident in Israel's defensive and offensive capabilities. They feel confident that if Iran starts a confrontation with Israel now, Israel is in a good position to deal with this both defensively and offensively. And they feel that the technological military gap between Israel and Iran is only growing, and it's growing in Israel's favor. That is what I'm hearing beyond the headlines from Israel's defense establishment. And it's really honestly a good thing to hear because, when you look at the day-to-day media headlines, a lot of people are very nervous about the situation with Iran. So I think it's good to hear from the people who actually develop, the missile defenses and the offensive capabilities. And what they're saying is we have a good grip on this threat. And it's not our first rodeo. We've come face to face with it in a 12-day war. So we are not in uncharted waters. And these capabilities, which have been developed, for 25 years, when we're looking at the Arrow program and the way the fighter jets and the drones reached Iran and the refuelers, these are capabilities that have been developed over the past quarter of a century. So nobody in the defense establishment is looking at this as if it's something that popped up yesterday. And so I would relay that to you. Obviously these are still tense days, but we are in a gray zone. But if push comes to shove, the people beyond the headlines in the defense establishment of Israel say the situation is reasonably under control when it comes to Israel's ability to deal with Iran as it stands today. Now, what Israelis would want, would they prefer that this happens now, or would they want to deal? It really depends on who you ask. I'm not going to weigh in on this now. I just wanted to give you an overview. And before I move, yeah, somebody wrote Bandar Abbas. That was the port that I was trying to remember. Before I move over to Gaza, if there are any questions about Iran, about military capabilities, about tensions, this is the time before I move to Gaza. Here is another comment from Austin, but is it not the same people who got it wrong over Gaza? Well, Austin, that's a great question. That's a great question. So let me answer that because it's a really fair and important question. Why should we believe the assessments of the same defense establishment that got Gaza so wrong? Totally a fair question. Here's the way I see it. One of the reasons why the defense establishment got Gaza so wrong is because they spent very little resources in studying, in infiltrating Gaza. The lion's share of intelligence and operational capabilities over the years preceding this war were invested in dealing with Hezbollah and Iran. And we saw that during the war. Look at the difference in results. When Israel took on Hezbollah, when it actually activated its real offensive capabilities, the pagers, the airstrikes, which took out 70% of Hezbollah's firepower, the majority of Hezbollah's command from Nasrallah all the way down, incapacitated in a number of just a couple of weeks. Look at that, and look at Iran. Look how long Israel planned for that, and when it activated, you can see where the capabilities and the intelligence were prioritized. And so, because Gaza was neglected, for many reasons, which I doubt we have the time to get into today, but many reasons. That's why you can see the difference in the results in each arena. And so not only do I actually believe this assessment, personally, if you ask me why we should believe it, but I also think that the fact that these capabilities were tested just back in June, not so long ago, we all remember, we were at war with Iran in June. And the performance was outstanding. I mean, I can tell you that militaries around the world are studying the June War as a model campaign. The surprise, the intelligence, the use of Mossad teams on the ground, the ability to decapitate military leadership, the striking of nuclear sites, ballistic missiles, individuals who were operating, Iranians, commanders who were operating, activating Hezbollah and Hamas, taking out in their own homes and bunkers and bases. You can tell that this is where most of the resources were invested, and so the combination of all of these reasons makes me reasonably confident in their assessment. And regarding Gaza, I think they're now playing catch up. Israel controls 50% of the Gaza Strip. Maybe this is the right way to pivot to Gaza. So there is now a catching up when it comes to the Gaza Strip. And I think now that, we are at this phase, what they call stage 2 of the ceasefire, which I'm going to talk about now, the Israeli intelligence community has, of course, realized its horrendous neglect of the Gaza Strip. Some of this was because of cognitive bias. Some of this was because of a lack of willingness to look at the intelligence that did exist. By the way, there are some people who claim, and I think correctly, that even though there was a huge neglect, systematic neglect of Gaza leading up to October 7th, there were still, despite that, enough warning signs that had there been a control center in Southern Command, for example, or in military intelligence headquarters in the Kiryat, that would have just put some of these dots together, that there would be enough red flags to declare an emergency and to bring forces to the border. So even with that neglect, there was probably still enough intelligence signs, including, by the way, the getting hold of the Hamas invasion plan, what they call the Walls of Jericho plan. That plan was in the hands of Israeli intelligence, but it was dismissed. So there are lots of factors into looking why it went wrong, but let's look at where we are now today. The situation today, another gray zone. This is how we started and how we're going to continue. So, I don't know how many of you have gone down recently to the Gaza envelope or have had a chance to visit some of these kibbutzim and moshavim, sderot. I went down there about 2.5 months ago. I did a speaking event there. And one of the most remarkable things that you can see I really it was amazing to see this visually because this was something that I was actually almost campaigning for during the war, how vital this was. What you saw were several kilometers of IDF control. In other words, there was no hint of unauthorized presence of anybody, especially, of course, Hamas, anywhere near the border. You saw pillars of smoke where the IDF was active, destroying terrorist infrastructure. Just to recap, Israel controls 53% of the Gaza Strip. Hamas controls 47%. What divides those two lines is something called the yellow line. And anytime that Hamas tries to send terror cells across the yellow line, which is almost every day, the IDF detects that and eliminates the threat. So they're constantly testing it. And so what that means is that if you go down to the border, what you will see is the Gaza Strip is not very big to begin with. So I don't know if you want to call this strategic depth. It's probably too narrow for that, but I would call it operational depth. For the first time since the year 2005, when Israel withdrew from Gaza, there is operational depth, and the military is far ahead of the last line of civilian residences. And that means that Hamas cannot come close to the Gaza envelope and turn as an organized terror wave of attacks. Maybe they'll be able to get, a few terrorists through. I'm sure that they're going to try, but it'll be very, very difficult for them because wherever you go, 4 or 5 kilometers in, you've got the IDF, and it's holding the entire territory. There are very few Gazan civilians there. According to reports, you do have some anti-Hamas Gaza militias that are active in these IDF-controlled areas, and lots of cooperation for obvious reasons, the common interest. But this is a new reality. This is a really brand new reality. So what's happening on the Gazan side, on the IDF side of Gaza, is that every single day you've got what they call brigade level battle groups, which is made up of infantry and engineering. Engineering have a huge role here, and of course artillery and the armored corps and the Air Force. Taking out what's left, what they discover of the massive war machine that Hamas had embedded. And the thing that stands out to me, this hardly ever hits the headlines, so this is perfect for beyond the headlines, is that even today, months of IDF control, basically uncontested, the Hamas is not active in these areas for the most part. So it's not a very active combat zone. It's still dangerous because they're testing it from the Hamas side, but there's not much firefights going on there on a day-to-day basis, and yet they're still discovering tunnels. So that gives you an indication of just how many kilometers of tunnels were dug under Hamas. If the IDF is still discovering tunnels in this section that they have near full control of, very little resistance, and they're still finding these tunnels, just imagine how many tunnels are left on the Hamas side in Gaza City and what they call the central camps, and how much of a challenge it's going to be, possible, but very challenging, to detect those and destroy those under full combat conditions. So that's a formidable mission that's waiting for IDF Southern Command if and when it gets the order to do so. The tunnels of Gaza City are the main strategic asset that Hamas has left. It's losing day by day. The tunnels on the Israeli side, they're being discovered and destroyed. The booby trap buildings discovered and destroyed. And there's also clearance. This is also part of the American let's call it initiative to clear the rubble so that there can be future building in these areas. There's some sort of idea that Gaza civilians will be attracted to live there. This is very far away, and I think any talk of this as a realistic or near-term measure is not very based in reality. But this is what's going on the Israeli side. On the Hamas side of the border, we have exactly the opposite phenomena. This is where most of the 2 million Gazans are living. They have reestablished their rule of terror. They have replenished the ranks of terrorists. They're doing this with the money that they're smuggling in, with the taxes that they're placing on the Gazans, and they're offering them a salary, but not much training. They're trying to restart their weapons production by smuggling what they call dual-use material. These are civilian goods that can be repurposed for military goods. They're trying to do that. And they're basically using their allies, Qatar and Turkey, to try and influence the Trump administration to buy them more time, to hold the IDF off, to hold Israel off, and to eventually put pressure on Israel to actually leave the Gaza Strip. This is what Hamas wants, obviously. It wants to be able to turn around and tell the Palestinians and the entire Middle East that they conducted the worst massacre of the Jews since the Holocaust, and they lived and survived as a ruling entity to tell the tale. And I think it's critical for Israel and future generations to ensure that doesn't happen. The Islamists, the jihadists, cannot be allowed to rule a single millimeter of Gaza when all is said and done. So I think that that's clear to the Israeli leadership, military and civilian. And the question is one of timing and how to collapse the Hamas regime and how to do this in a way that doesn't upset relations with Washington, which is still trying to push through its grand initiative. I see that there are some questions here. We've got one from Batsheva. Was part of the Gaza problem the fear of hurting or killing our own people and then being able to find the others? Hate to use the word. You're talking about hostages, I assume, Batsheva. And if so, absolutely. The hostage crisis was a major operational impediment to operations in the Gaza Strip, no question. I mean, we can say now, and the IDF was hinting at this throughout the war, that the locations of the hostages were generally known. I don't know if all of them or most of them, but it's at least most of them. They were flagged. The IDF has a very sophisticated command and control digital map, command and control of every arena that it fights in, and it can flag to all forces, whether they're in the air, on the ground, and Navy. They can flag things, and the locations of hostages were flagged. I think we can say that as a safe bet, but that creates real restrictions. Of course, nobody wants to take any chances. Now we don't have that situation. We don't have any operational restrictions if this stage of the ceasefire collapses. What we have are diplomatic restrictions because President Trump, and here we are back in the gray area zone, he wants to try and make this happen. He wants to try and get stage P going. So just, Morris, do you want to give me a time check? Because I lost track of the time.
Yeah, well, you're 3 minutes over the half hour. So
Uh-huh.
what do you want to do? Go on to about 22?
Sure. Another
Yeah,
7 minutes.
another
Sure thing.
7 minutes. Yeah, something like that.
Sure thing. Okay. So look, so President Trump, what he wants to do is to basically prove that with the help of forceful, aggressive, personalized, transactional diplomacy, Gaza can be brought into the future and Hamas can be thrown to the wayside or forced to become something that it currently is not, which is some sort of political force that's not committed to jihad and endless armed conflict. In Israel, there is, let me use some British understatement here. There is deep skepticism. This is the biggest understatement I can think of regarding the chances of this working. Nobody here that I speak to thinks that Hamas can be forced to lay down their arms, that they're going to disarm, that they're going to demilitarize. And just to quickly define those words, demilitarization means destroying the tunnels, the biggest strategic asset in Gaza City. It means, and disarmament means thousands of, Kalashnikovs, anti-tank missiles, launchers, IEDs. There's probably more IEDs in Gaza per square kilometer than anywhere on Earth. It means giving those up. Now, what will Hamas try to do? It will try to do some sort of symbolic disarmament. It will try to say, here are a few trucks with weapons. Look, we're disarming and we're willing to freeze and put these in depots that we have access to. And they'll take a page out of Hezbollah's book, what Hezbollah is trying to do in Lebanon. We probably don't have time to get into Lebanon, so I'll stick to Gaza until the end of our session here. But they've learned from Hezbollah what it's like to try and pretend that you're disarming. And so I think that behind the scenes, what needs to happen and what probably is happening is that Israel is telling the United States, look, we know how many weapons Hamas has. Here are the numbers. This is quantifiable. Here are the tunnels. Here are the weapons. Here's what we think the deadline should be. And hopefully we will reach some sort of quiet understanding that if and when Hamas fails to disarm and demilitarize by the date, in line with these very clear criteria, these benchmarks, then Israel will get the green light to take action in its own way. Now, what does that mean? Because this is another gray zone. This is another intersection. Okay, there's a debate in Israel about what should happen once this stage of the ceasefire collapses, and everybody's assuming that at some point it's going to collapse. What should Israel do? So a lot of people are saying there's no choice but to move the military in and to finish the war, finish the goals of the war. The goals of the war were to destroy Hamas as a terror regime, as a political regime, and to make sure that Gaza is never again a source of threat to the state of Israel. And that means sending in divisions. It means evacuating the 2 million Gazans to new areas. It means restarting the international firestorm that obviously we're going to face if this happens. And some people think there's no other way. If we want to make sure that the Islamists and jihadists never again rule Gaza, we can't stop halfway. Now, there's another school of thought, and they're saying the military should only be one component of this. Yes, we'll need to resume operations, but we also have control over all of Hamas's borders. In other words, the IDF is surrounding Hamas from the north, east, and south, and the west from the sea. It's got control of the Philadelphia corridor separating Gaza from Egypt. That means that it can stop the vast majority of the smuggling. This is power. This is not just military power. It's also strategic power. So some people think that Israel needs to collapse the Hamas regime through a combined military, diplomatic, and I guess you could call it a strategic maneuver. And they don't think that we need to send those ground divisions in to finish the job. This is a minority view, so far as I can tell, but it's out there. And this is a real debate that's underway. So I think that at the end of the day, what we're facing in Gaza is an untenable reality in the long term. We cannot have two Gazas. We cannot have, a Berlin, East Berlin, West Berlin type of situation going on forever. I think everybody pretty much agrees in Israel who's dealing with these matters. The Hamas cannot be allowed to rule. And even if they're greatly weakened today, just the fact that they're indoctrinating the next generation of Palestinians, and I don't know if you had a chance to see this, but there are videos showing them continuing the brainwashing in mosques, in makeshift schools. The most important thing for them is to get that message to the next generation of Palestinian kids that the jihad is the most important thing. And look, we've destroyed all of Gaza just for this jihad because it's the top priority. It's the thing that matters most. Just that poisoning of the next generation. If that doesn't stop, if it's not cut, then our children will have to go back into Gaza and fight future wars. And I don't think that that's a reasonable request to kick the can down the road to future generations. So even if you look at it just from the brainwashing cultural eternalization of the conflict, even that is a good enough reason to make sure that the status quo doesn't continue. So I think I've reached pretty much the hour. So thank you very much to all of you. I really enjoyed talking to this group. If you have any further questions, happy to hear it. And feel free to sign up to my Patreon, Lapin Assessment on Google, for email updates. For me, thank you very much for tuning in.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Yaakov. As is usual, when I send out your recording, I will send out the information about your assessment and website and so on and so forth, so people have the opportunity to see more of what you say and also to ask you direct questions, which I know you do answer. So thank you very much indeed. And you've certainly provided us a very clear, thoughtful, and informative presentation and cut through the headlines and explained the complex security realities that we're facing. So thank you very much indeed, Yaakov, on behalf of all of us. And we look forward to seeing you again shortly. And
Will do. Will do.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. And I can see people clapping. So that's a sign that you did well, other than my words. So thank you very much indeed. Let me remind everybody that this coming Thursday, we have Oren Kessler, an author and journalist, who will be speaking about Lord Herbert Samuel and the Mufti, and how secret files reveal why Samuel himself elevated the notorious cleric. So that's a historical perspective. And next Sunday, we have for Beyond the Headlines, Joel Osseran. Yaakov, I know you will know him. So Joel
Is
Ossoran.
is he the brother of Ariel?
Yes.
Yes, I don't know him personally. I know Ariel very
Oh,
well.
1 minute. No, I apologize. We will be having Ariel Ossoran.
Ah, that's my
I
colleague
do.
from my twin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So a colleague from I-24 News. So that should be very interesting as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to log on for both of those. And with that, I wish you Shavua Tov. And again, thank you, Yaakov, for being with us. Be well, everybody. Have a